Good morning, everybody. For this talk, I wanted to start with a koan, case 22 in the Blue Cliff record, the turtle-nosed snake. So Seppo said, "On South Mountain, there's a turtle-nosed snake. Every one of you should take a good look." Choki said, "A lot of people in this auditorium will die today." A monk cited this to Gensha, who said, "Only Choki could say something like that. Even so, I differ." The monk said, "What do you mean?" Gensha said, "What's the use of South Mountain?" Umon threw his cane down in front of Seppo and made a gesture of fright. "Ah, it's my turtle-nosed snake!" Yeah! So, I didn't really want to talk about the koan. I wanted to talk about that last line, fright. Basically, fear is what I wanted to talk about today. What it is, what it does to us, and maybe how we can practice with it. And of course, I'm not like a psychologist or anything. This is just some thoughts I had. Probably a lot of people have maybe more insight into this than I do, I'm sure. Years ago, though, I was at a bookstore and they had a whole, a remainder bin, the cheap books they're trying to get rid of. And there was a book in there. It had just kind of a sickly yellow-green cover, and the title was in black words. It just said fear. And the author was Chinese, I think. And I picked it up and was looking through it. It didn't have a plot. It didn't have a storyline or any. All it was one paragraph, one page after another, after another, after another of just images. Descriptions of things that this author found really disturbing and fearful. I thought it was pretty interesting. It was only $2. I ended up not buying it because I couldn't imagine actually reading it. But it was kind of interesting that someone would do that, put together all these fearful things. So fear, it's an emotion that almost nobody likes. It's considered really, most people would think of it as a very negative emotion. It can have hugely negative effects on us for sure. I used to think that instead of greed, anger, and ignorance as the three poisons, it should be greed, fear, and ignorance. But actually, why not just fear and ignorance? Because, greed and anger are usually manifestations of fear. So in Rapid City here, we're going to start doing an Intro to Zen class on the first Sunday of every month. And we've done this many times over the years, but we haven't done it regularly, which we're going to start doing regularly. And usually when we start the class, we have, everyone sitting there, we have everyone introduce themselves and ask, well, what brought you here? Why are you here? Probably 70, maybe even 80% of the people say that they're having some sort of anxiety or some sort of mental discomfort in their life. And, they're hoping that meditation can help them deal with that. So, fear, that's, to have some anxiety in your life, that's not unusual at all. Fear's a kind of a pervasive feeling for any living thing. Usually, like I said, seen as a negative emotion, but it also has really a positive side to it. And you can think, if you've ever gone on one of those roller coasters where you flip upside down a couple times, people are screaming, but they're laughing too, they enjoy that. It's like watching a scary movie. People go out of their way to do that because they like that exhilaration. I mean, fear can be kind of exhilarating. It can enliven you in small doses, of course. People go skiing for that reason, because they can go flying down a mountainside or, on a mountain bike, ripping down a hill or something like that. It charges you up with adrenaline, and that's valuable. People like that, but too much of it can be overwhelming. And then another good thing about fear is it's a protective emotion. It's there to protect us, to keep us alive. here's my turtle-nosed snake again. Put him right up there. He's kind of a cool snake. But anyway, you know, if you're out in the woods and you know walking through the brush and you hear that buzz of a rattlesnake or something, ideally you're going to get a jolt of fear and jump out of the way. You know, and if you don't, you know, you might get very sick, or even you know you can lose a limb, or even you know in some cases lose your life. So fear, it's you know it's there to protect us. You know, we always hear challenge your fears, you know, conquer your fears, which is good advice, I think. But you know, for some, it's good advice for some fears if it's not a you know an immediate threat. If you're standing on a railroad track and you see a train coming rushing down the track towards you, you better feel afraid and get out of the way. That's you know that's what it's for. So those are the good things about fear. Maybe I haven't discovered any others, but there might be some. But you know, it's usually considered a more of a negative thing. Fear, you know, because it can have very negative effects on us. Just in addition to being uncomfortable, it can also cause us to really have some negative behaviors. You know, greed and anger being one. But you know, if we project our fear onto other things, we can get very hostile, and you know, it can harm ourselves, our loved ones, our society, the whole world. You know, it can have terrible consequences if we go around living in a state of fear that isn't, what would you say, conscious. You know, and you can, you know, that's pretty well known. You know, I remember in Star Wars movies, there was one movie where they were looking for this. They went on a quest or something to find this kid, this little kid. You know, his name was Anakin Skywalker, and he's just this really cute little kid. And it was kind of like searching for the reincarnated Dalai Lama or something. You know, they found this kid, and he had the highest level of these metachlorians in his blood that they'd ever found, and supposedly those metachlorians were what gave the Jedi their superpowers. So they were very excited to find this kid. They thought he was going to be kind of like a savior to their cause, you know. And they took him to a Yoda, and Yoda examines him, and he goes, you know, Yoda's kind of troubled. He says, you know, there's much fear in this child. You know, fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hatred. Hatred leads to violence. And you know, sure enough, the kid grows up to become Darth Vader. You know, the kind of the anti-Jedi, the ultimate evil in the whole series of films. You know, because he was starting out with this fear. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh, in his book about the Heart Sutra, it's called The Heart of Understanding. It's a small book, and it's really great. I used to, I love that book. I've read it I don't know how many times, but he says in there that, you know, Avalokiteshvara has many gifts for us, but the greatest gift of all is the gift of non-fear. And in the, you know, in the Heart Sutra itself, it says, the Bodhisattva lives prajnaparamita, with no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance, therefore no fear, far beyond deluded thought. This is nirvana. Last week, we discussed a saying from Dogen, just one sentence. It said, if you open your hand, you might get everything. And that reminded me of, you know, the first of our four vows, you know. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to receive them, to open to them, you know, to open myself up to them, you know. To open your hand to receive, though, you can't do that if you're afraid, you know, or it's very difficult, you know, because fear tends to make us, instead of open our hand, it tends to make us clench it up and put us into a defensive type posture. So how do we deal with that, you know? About the time I started sitting, like a long time ago, when I started coming to Great Mountain, I had some interesting experiences with fear. And basically what it was I suddenly started having anxiety attacks or panic attacks. And I didn't even know what they were. I mean, it was a totally new thing to me, and they weren't they were terrifying, really terrifying. But it was I didn't know what was even happening. What would happen was just randomly, for no reason I could think of, my heart would start just racing and skipping beats, and I would feel this like sense of impending dread or doom, and I might feel dizzy, disoriented, out of breath, and it could last for hours or maybe sometimes only for minutes. But it was absolutely horrifying, you know. And sometimes it happened a couple times when I was driving and I had to pull over to the side of the road. I couldn't drive anymore. And I thought, good God, what am I going to do if I'm like in Chicago or someplace like that driving and this happens? You know, it was very disruptive to my life. You know, and I didn't know what it was. I mean, I didn't identify it as a panic attack. I never even heard of them really, and I thought I was having heart problems or something like that, some physical problem. Um, and you know, I actually did go to the emergency room one time and went to a cardiologist, and they didn't really find, you know, they didn't find anything. But fortunately, when this was all happening, I had my Zen practice, and I was pretty into it and sitting a lot. And even more fortunately, I went to a week-long session down at Great Mountain in when we were in Lafayette. And even more fortunately, I had a panic attack while I was at the session that wouldn't go away. And believe me, that didn't seem fortunate at the time. It seemed like the most horrifying thing that could happen to just sit there with this. And Shishin Roshi was running the whole session in this case, and we did Doksan like 3 times a day. And I went in there and told him, you know, what was happening and what I felt like, and he told me exactly what I didn't want to hear, which was just sit with that feeling, just sit there with it. You know, that I did not want to hear that. You know, I was hoping there was some secret thing to make this go away. Um, but I think on some level I knew that I had to like whatever this was to face it, to just sit with it and be with it. I kind of had the feeling if I got up and ran away, which is what my instincts were, I'd be running forever, you know. So I did sit with it, and it was a really uncomfortable session. You know, I just sat there in a state of sweaty terror for several days, and then on the very last full day of the session in the morning, something changed. And what changed was it just suddenly occurred to me like, oh, this is just a feeling of fear. I'm just feeling afraid. And that might sound like, you know, what am I, retarded or a fence post? I don't understand. I don't know that, but believe it or not, I mean, that was a revelation to me. I just, you know, that was a new thing. And all of a sudden I had this great sense of relief, like, oh, it's just a feeling of fear. There isn't some invisible monster standing behind me ready to snap my head off. I'm just feeling afraid. So, you know, it was a great sense of relief, and I left there thinking like, wow, I, I beat this thing, whatever it was. I conquered it, you know. But that wasn't really the case. When I got back home, I still had panic attacks, and I was a little bit disappointed by that, let me tell you. But the thing was, things had changed, you know, because I had suddenly realized what was really happening, and so I started to really look at fear in my life, and you know, I thought of myself. I think my self-image was of someone that just didn't really get afraid very much. And I realized that no, actually, there was a lot of things that I was afraid of. You know, that mostly, actually, it was just most of it was not like real physical threats. Just you know, we bought a house. We had a young son, and I was trying to run all these businesses, and I got myself into a lot of financial problems, and I was being audited, and I owed the IRS a shitload of money that I didn't have, and you know, I had some insecurities maybe about the safety of my family, losing our house maybe, and whether I was actually uh, doing my uh, role as a provider, you know. And you know, there was probably some stuff behind that too, but I think that was the stimulus. And So it made me really look at how this fear was coming up in my life. And I realized what it made me realize then was that what feelings want is to be felt, which is just what Shishin Roshi was telling me. Feelings want to be felt. That's, we have our self-talk, which is like our intellect communicating with itself, but our body also communicates with us, but it doesn't have words; it has feelings. And those. It's just like my dog comes up to me sometimes, and he just sits there, and he doesn't want particularly anything except for me to just reach down and pet him. And if I don't, pretty soon he'll start putting his paw up on my lap. And if I still ignore him, pretty soon he's going to be licking the side of my face. He just wants to be acknowledged. And, feelings are just like that. And if we push them away or suppress them or ignore them, they're not going to go away. They're just going to get stronger, just like my dog. And eventually they'll be jumping in our face to where you can't ignore them. So I realized then that I was still having these anxiety attacks and stuff, but it gave me a way to kind of really deal with them. And that was, I thought, well, feelings want to be felt. Then what I need to do is just feel it. So I started every time I had this overwhelming anxiety, just actually leaning into it as much as I could. If I could stop somewhere, I would just stop and I would just sit there and feel it and just focus on the feeling as hard as I could, and not really try and tell myself to calm down or anything like that, which never worked anyway, but just feel it and feel it and feel it. And what I found was, and this process went on for like 2 or 3 years actually, but those attacks, once I started doing that, they started to get shorter and shorter. And then instead of this sense of terror, I became pretty confident, like, oh, well, these things, they come up and then they're going to go away. And so they weren't nearly as troubling as they had been to me. And so they got less and less, and it got to the point where I could feel one coming up and it didn't even worry me anymore. It was just like, oh yeah, here's that anxiety feeling again. And I would focus on it and it would just evaporate, because it just wanted to be felt and I was feeling it. So eventually they just totally went away. So I think it's been 20 years or something since I've even had one. But that feeling made me think about fear and anxiety quite a bit and how it affects us. Anxiety might be an inner manifestation of, at least in my case, I mean, there's probably lots of other reasons for this, but in this particular instance, it seemed like a manifestation of like a fear that I didn't really want to, I kept pushing this fear away from me. I didn't want to acknowledge it. And so it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. But, an outer manifestation of that same thing could be, our projections onto other people, onto other cultures, onto other colors. And, it could cause a lot of hostility and separation. And, it seems like that's happening in our society right now. We're getting more and more polarized and dividing ourselves up into camps. And, it seems you can see it's all, or most of it is fear-based, and, we need to bring that fear up and really look at it. But, we live in a society that basically says it's not okay to even admit you're afraid. It's not cool. It's uncool to be afraid. You drive around, you see all these pickup trucks with this sticker on their window. It says "No fear." I'm not afraid of anything. But fear is it's just a natural emotion. There's nothing wrong with it, and I think we ignore it at our peril. And also, it's a particularly dangerous emotion if it's not brought up into the light, because it turns into hostility. It's protective, so we become defensive and then eventually offensive, manifesting this fear that we're not digesting ourselves or really looking at. So recently we had a sesshin up in the Black Hills in November, a 7-day sesshin. And the person that's usually our jisha was ill and couldn't attend. So Kondo Roshi picked someone else. There's a guy there, a friend of mine, who's been sitting with us for about 2 years or so, and really pretty devoted to sitting and meditation and introspection. And I don't think he knew Kondo really well. Anyway, he got picked as Jisha, and Kondo is very particular about all the bells and everything, all the ritual, all that stuff. So he explained everything, how he wanted everything done. And then right before we were starting, I was working on something, and my friend came up and he couldn't remember exactly when. He said, "Am I supposed to? How do I do the incense? How do I do the bells and all that?" And I said, "Well, Roshi's right over there in that cabin. Just go over and ask him." And he just kind of blurted out. He said, "I'm scared." And I thought that was really wonderful. I mean, this guy's no fraidy cat. He's like 50 years old, and. But I thought, oh, I mean, I can see why he'd be a little nervous. He didn't really, it is a little nerve wracking. But most guys don't say that. Most people wouldn't. He was just very honest and open with his feeling. He just kind of came out, and I said, oh, well, you know what? I don't really remember either. Let's go over there and ask him. So we did, and it was fine. But I just thought that was kind of wonderful because it's something you don't see much. Anyway, so that's my talk. But I had some questions. Do you see fear as an issue in your life? Have you tried bringing it into your practice? If so, how? And if so, has it worked? Has it been helpful? And then, of course, anything else that comes up. So thank you